Hello, my name is Amelia Mundy and I graduated from the University of Kent in July 2020 with a first-class degree in film and drama. The following video will be a discussion on how topics within the film and television adaptation module and others rooted in adaptation can be taken from theory through to practice, using my own experiences as examples, which I hope can show you just how viable it is to use adaptation within your artistic endeavours. Throughout my time at university, I did my best to tailor my degree to fit the specific areas of the film and theatre industries that I was interested in. From a young age, I'd always been fascinated and thoroughly invested in adapted works. My very first creative endeavours involved imagining who I would cast in the adaptations of my favourite storybooks. What would we cut? Where would we shoot? And in turn, rolling my eyes at the adaptations that followed, adamant that I could have done better. And I suppose this makes sense. When we are young, many of our first artistic exposures will be adaptations, whether we realise it or not. Fairy tales and oral traditional stories, adaptations of books that our parents know are child-friendly, sequels to content we already enjoy. It is quite natural to explore the safe and familiar before venturing out on original creative journeys. During my 3 years at Kent, I was lucky enough to be able to choose separate adaptation modules in both film and drama. Film and television adaptation and theatre and adaptation. Although similar, the combination of these two modules was a complementary and highly beneficial one. They provided much of the same theoretic backbone, but demonstrated how that can be perceived through the lenses of differing mediums and core case studies. Certain topics arose more frequently than others, there being perhaps more universally applicable. It was some of these that then formed the initial framework for my own creative exploits, which I will discuss in detail later. First, I think it is valuable to retrace those topics, dissect them a little, and track my journey from beginning to write around the theory to using it in my artwork. Medium specificity. You will all be familiar with it since it is a topic covered early on in the film and television adaptation module, and is a key element of the aforementioned drama module too. To refresh, medium specificity is a concept within aesthetics and art criticism which argues that different artistic media have distinctive qualities and are inimitable due to an artist's ability to manipulate those qualities. It is easy to get bogged down in the cyclicality of this theory, but ultimately it can be hugely simplified. For example, what can a film do that print cannot? What can the theatre do that a film cannot? And as an artist responsible for any of those or other artistic media, how do we go about making use of those things that, say, film can do that nothing else can? As a joint honours arts student, maintaining an acute awareness of how to manipulate the unique factors of those two artistic media seemed quintessential to both my studies and future practice. In my writing, I found it most beneficial to discuss it in conjunction with adapted material that was commercially prominent in both fields. After all, the more well-known a source is, the more easily accessible any information about it is, and if it is adaptation in practice you're interested in, then I think commerce is important to focus on. So, I wrote a lot about The Lion King. It sounds quite basic, but if you want to learn about medium specificity in the industry, it is simply a prime example. The source's transition from animation to stage to pseudo-live action and all its spin-off material is incredibly well documented. This allowed me to fully grasp the nuanced qualities that enabled it to fly, and sometimes fall, when transposed to alternative art forms. Furthermore, understanding the times when intermediate adaptation is not such a success is absolutely as important for practice as it is noting those triumphs. Naturally, it can be complex or rather redundant trying to categorise any intermediate adaptation as good or bad. I know that The Lion King 2019 has its fans, somewhere, but legacy is a strong indicator of success. The Lion King musical has run for 25 years since its debut. The 2019 film, as with most of the Disney remakes, has already faded into obscurity, despite its box office achievement. Beyond this material, looking to any prominent corporate giant was endlessly valuable. Artistic dignity aside, if you are hoping to build a financially stable career within adaptation in the industry, you should study what sells, analyse why, and incorporate that knowledge of the market into your work. Now that is never to say that you should not push the boundaries of what is conventionally successful in adaptation. Please do. Similarly, commerce is not the only route to an economically lucrative career, or a guarantee of one, but typically that knowledge is a good foundation for such. Transmedia storytelling can be distilled to meaning the development of stories on different media, amplified by the continual increase of new technologies and fans seeking interaction with the material. The impact of fandom is something I am hugely familiar with, being active within many myself. That said, prior to the course, I had never considered it theoretically, or as something to bear in mind when it came to my practice. I chose to write extensively about Star Wars in relation to this topic throughout university, a franchise that, as you will know, was added to the film and television adaptation module this term, and is a wonderful case study of such. Unbeknownst to me as I began this research was how valuable it could be in concurrence with my studies on medium specificity. Via the means of Star Wars and a few other examples, I learnt the importance of investigating the impact of fandom, legacy, and public desire on a property. Regarding the relation of this to medium specificity, transmedia storytelling is a valuable way of identifying the aspects of a source which are most important to the fanbase or consumer, and medium specificity identifies what is unique to the wider form. Combining research of the two, in relation to a specific property, can be an astute means of configuring how to adapt the material in question, that is, what is important in that medium, and what is important in that source, from a societal perspective. During my second year at university, myself and some other drama students from the Theatre and Adaptation module formed our theatre group Lost Boys Productions, named as such due to our collective desire to never grow up. When considering the source text for our first piece of adaptive work during said module, we agreed upon one major requirement. We wanted this debut adaptive piece to be something high profile and classical. The ideal material would have been adapted numerous times since its conception and across multiple media, providing us, as novice adaptees, with a wealth of information to draw from. We wanted to adapt the property as a whole, and not a single iteration of it. This would drastically widen our target market to fans of the material in general, or of specific versions. After much consideration, the idea of Peter Pan was raised. Being self-proclaimed Lost Boys, this immediately resonated with us, and even more so when taking the property's history into account. There are thus links here to my studies in transmedia storytelling in terms of legacy. When a property has saturated multiple artistic mediums for over a century, audience familiarity is almost inherent, and the basis of that content alone is enough to initially engage. The character of Peter Pan was first brought to fruition when he appeared in The Little White Bird by J.M. Barrie in 1902. A new tale, Peter Pan, or The Boy Who Wouldn't Grow Up, was staged in 1904, with Barrie then developing this into novel form, retitled as Peter and Wendy in 1911. It is this play, and consequently the novel Peter and Wendy, that bears the bones of the story so often adapted for stage and screen. Peter Pan, as a complete property, possesses a unique quality of being rooted in theatre and print, and yet famed almost entirely for its cinematic descendants. Peter Pan by Hogan 2003, Hook by Spielberg in 1991, and most famously Disney's Peter Pan in 1953. Intermediality is an inherent part of the material's extensive history, and it is this version that comes to mind for most when Peter Pan is mentioned. When adapting it for stage, that was something we remained strictly conscious of. It may sound obvious, but to us the idea of adapting a source was one that usually came back to its starting point. As I've said, in this case that would have resulted in a piece of theatre that barely resembled the Peter Pan modern audiences recognise. Therefore, whilst remaining aware of including elements from previous versions, we wanted to attract as wide an audience as possible, so we took into account legacy and that idea of nostalgia, and drew largely from this version for our own. My next piece of adaptive work was also theatrical, and utilised much of the same knowledge of history and legacy as Peter Pan did. This time round, we focused even more so on the idea of nostalgia specifically, and medium specificity, with Scooby-Doo. Whilst Disney's Peter Pan is also animated, the performance style we employed did not warrant the study of the primary source material's form in particular. On the flip side, with Scooby-Doo, we wanted to create an experience that felt like the cartoon had been plucked from the screen and dropped on stage. Now, I don't like to use the term accurate when describing an adaptation. Can something ever truly be an exact replica of the original if the medium has changed? And isn't that completely subjective? Anyway, it wasn't the idea of fidelity we were getting at with this concept, but rather the aim to transpose the tropes of animation, and the animation within Scooby-Doo specifically, to the stage. Reconstructing the feeling of watching that cartoon, and being aware that trying to exactly recreate it was not possible. After all, animation does some things theatre can't. So how can you adapt it? The main thing we came to realise was that cartoon physics are not possible to exactly mimic. Now, that's not to say we didn't try, but...
Look out, stomach! Here it comes!
Well, it wasn't going to work out.
Well, at least you left me the olive.
Instead, we singled out specific tropes in the movement that were A, distinctive to the form, and B, distinctive to the show, and strived to emulate these to the best of our abilities. For example, the iconic Scooby-Doo running gag. We studied each character's poise, the differences in rhythm, rise and fall, and the huddled group staging. Now, that was just a trial run, but you get the idea. There were several of these iconic gags we practiced imitating, and it went down amazingly with test audiences, proving to us we had struck upon an approach to adapting material that was on track to tick all our boxes. Similarly, Scooby-Doo is a show that entirely relies upon structure and formula in every other sense too. The emphasis on nostalgia would be fueled, therefore, by the audience's familiarity with these formulaic qualities. We were free to create an entirely original plot providing it hit those key moments, was saturated with iconic catchphrases in the dialogue,
Jeepers! Jinkies!
Dang, I still don't have a catchphrase!
and was instantly recognisable as Scooby-Doo. Beyond the performance itself, visual iconography had to extend to marketing. Something we had realised during our Peter Pan project was the necessity of iconography in marketing, particularly as a young, inexperienced company with no fan base or major platform. And Scooby-Doo was a very easy property to do that with. It's like I said previously, you can adapt whatever you want, however you want, there really are no limits. But it can be a great help to start with material that sells itself. Material you can recognise with a single glance, that has ready-made fans of all ages, that is tried and tested by other artists before you. Those kind of sources open doors for new practitioners. On the flip side, that results in a greater pressure to meet expectations, for which all I would say is take note of those that didn't work. We spent hours, painful, arduous hours, watching the lowest rated Scooby-Doo content available. Analyse what you find, read what fans say, and try not to repeat those same mistakes. Now, what if, like many students, you are taking an adaptation-centered module because you needed to pick another one, and you have no intention of taking the subject any further? Well, I believe that many of the skills you learn when studying adaptation can still be used in almost any artistic practice. My latest film was a comedy, drama, superhero, fantasy adventure called Zero. I wrote an original script with wholly new characters and what I felt was my own unique flair. And for the most part, that is true. I was undoubtedly influenced by my favourite directors, TV shows, and even music, but who isn't? Anyway, theories such as medium specificity and transmedia storytelling can be valuable so much more broadly, in terms of even genre itself. My film ultimately developed to become a parody of the superhero genre. Parody imitates, comments on, or makes fun of its subject. When that subject is a genre within an artistic medium, then the term adaptation is hardly far from the truth, and so many of the same techniques can be applied. Much like my previous endeavours, I explored the stereotypical tropes of the genre and this time implemented them ironically. And even more broadly, I am constantly aware now, with any artistic project I embark on, of manipulating the unique qualities of that medium. Zero was the first film I completed post-adaptation studies, and I felt a conscious shift in my awareness of that during pre, post and actual production. That's not to say my experience was revolutionary. I think a lot of these things are subconsciously present regardless, but bringing that subconscious understanding to the forefront really helped me. You can watch Zero at kenttelevision.com under the KTV Films tab, where you will also find a video of me discussing the trailer. If you're interested in my wider work, then do check out the links at the end of the video to see my films and learn more about my theatrical projects. Please do not hesitate to get in touch with me via the following email address if you have any questions. I really hope this video was useful to even just one of you, and I am super excited to see the adaptive work you guys put out there in the future. Good luck!